The writing journey for the Graveyard Book was incredibly long. And looking back on it, I don't think it was the journey that I thought it was. I think sometimes you think you're on one journey and actually you're on another. Because the journey I thought I was on to write the Graveyard Book was to become a good writer. I had the idea for the Graveyard Book when I was about 25. And my son Mike would have been probably just 2 or almost 2. It would have been summer. And we lived in a very tall, thin, spindly house above a shop. And basically, you more or less had a room and then a staircase and then another room and then a staircase. And I had a child who loved his tricycle more than anything else in the world. And we had no garden. So every day I would take him and his tricycle over the road, over the little lane to the churchyard nearby, and he would ride his tricycle through the gravestones. And one day I looked at him and just thought, you know, he looks so comfortable here. He looks so at home. And then I thought, I could do a story about a kid, a baby like this, who wanders into a graveyard and is brought up by dead people. And then I thought, it would be kind of like the Jungle Book, where a kid wanders into a jungle and is brought up by jungle animals. And I loved the idea immediately, and I went off to my study and I wrote maybe a page, and I looked at the page that I'd written and I thought, I'm not a good enough writer. I'll put it off. And every 5 or 6 years I'd sit down and I'd write a page or two, and I'd look at it and I'd put it off until I was a better writer. And finally, in about 2003, I thought, you know, I'm as good a writer as I'm going to get. So I'll start the book. And I wrote it, this time starting in the middle. I wrote the story of the Witch's Headstone, chapter 4, as my very first thing, almost like a sort of tent pole. And then started at the beginning and worked up to it, and then did chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. When it was done, I realized that actually it hadn't been about becoming a good writer. I was a fairly good writer when I was 25, and the truth is you don't necessarily write a better book, you just write a different one. But what I was a very different person to the person I'd been when I had a 2-year-old son and a newborn baby girl. Because now I was somebody who'd actually brought up those children and had seen them go out into the world. And it was only when I got to the end of the book that I realized that in many ways what the Graveyard Book is about, because it's a book fundamentally about life, I got to write about life in the Graveyard Book, because if you set an entire book amongst dead people in a graveyard, you can write about life in a way that you probably couldn't if you were setting it in a school where there's nothing miraculous about the fact that everybody's breathing and changing and walking around. Everybody's doing it. But in a graveyard, I can actually, you suddenly see, it's like a white chalk mark on white paper. You wouldn't really see it. But if you put it against black paper, now you see the white chalk mark. So I'm writing about life. And I realized that I don't think I could have written that book as a young man, because I hadn't gone through the thing that parents do, where you've actually raised children, where you discover the glorious tragedy of being a parent, which is if you do your job right, they go away. If you do your job right, they grow up and they go out into the world, and you have this person that you really like, and you're not going to see them as much now, because they're going to get on with their own life. And that, I think, is so key to the end of the book, and it's so much what the book is about. It's about growing up, it's about learning, and it's about moving on.